Hi, everybody. This is Anna Maria from Lunavora Coaching. Welcome to another spontaneous episode of our new series, Impactful Conversations. And today I have the privilege to invite one of my friends and a colleague, Ali Flynn, all the way from Australia. Ali has a vast background in clinical therapy and psychology. She's also a serial entrepreneur, owner of a couple of successful businesses. Not only that, she is also an executive business coach and she runs a podcast, Challenges That Changes. And I'm going to link it down below in the description. So make sure you go ahead after this podcast and subscribe because it is very impactful. And as you know, I'm all about impact. And this type of podcast is unscripted, which means whatever happens in this conversation, aside of our pre-designed title, everything could happen. And the purpose of this podcast is to show you how to lead conversations that are engaging by asking open questions. And speaking of which, here is an open question for Ali. Ali, what is something that always comes to you when you are in your zone of genius? What is a mantra, sensation, association? How do you know when you are in your zone of impactful genius?
Tuffy. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Anna Maria, for having me. I was super excited about coming on today, and normally I would prep, if I knew I was coming in for an interview, but you had clearly said it's about you and I just having a chat. So I was like, all right, let's just come in and see how it goes. I think I would have to say it's a body sensation. When I'm in my genius lane, it's for me, it's like the outside world pauses and I have this little bubble around me and the person I'm having a conversation with. And I feel anchored and grounded and really present. I feel a sense of them, but also a sense of myself. I'm aware of my skin and I'm aware of the fresh air. And it's like this real kind of moment of time that is just about me and them having a conversation.
This is so powerful. And for our viewers, this is one of the reasons Ali and I click so well. We know each other from a mastermind for leaders. And something that we both share in common as a value is the value of being fully present in your interaction with others. And going off that concept of being fully present, I feel like many of us talk about presence and being fully present, including myself. However, what does it mean? If we were to describe to someone what does it mean to be fully present in a conversation, what does it mean to you? How do you know that you're present? And most importantly, how do you know that the other person is fully present?
Well, I get it wrong more than I get it right. It's something I'm constantly striving towards in my own personal life. But I think for me, I know when I'm fully present, when I'm not worrying about the past or fearful or thinking about or planning the future. So, for example, if you and I are having conversation now, Anne Maria, and I'm thinking about, oh, did I feed the dogs this morning? Or perhaps I'm thinking about after this conversation, I have 10 things that I need to do on my desk, then I would say that I'm not really truly present in this conversation in that moment. So what I try, and that's why I have this little idea of a bubble, because it's like, oh, everything can wait for now. I'm in this conversation and I don't need to pull the past in unless it's part of the conversation. It gives us context or relevance. And I don't need to be thinking about what needs to happen going forwards, or especially not if it's to do with what we're talking about. How do you do it?
Yes, and just to repeat what you said, because I'm sure that this is going to be a very valuable insight for people. As an action step, here is something you can do when you have an important conversation. And I would say when you have any kind of conversation, tell yourself everything that happened up until this moment is irrelevant unless, as Ali said, it's part of the conversation. And this way you are able to be fully present. Now, something I want to share here, which is very important, being fully present is not the same as being compartmentalized. Because especially in leadership, when both Ali and I we work with executives, sometimes in leadership you're almost you're almost required to compartmentalize your life, because when you are leading people, you have to put yourself in that bubble of presence for them. However, what is very important is that you create time to process your emotions every single day, especially if you're going through stuff, so that when you give someone 15 minutes or 20 minutes or 40 minutes or 60 minutes, you can be fully there. So this is an action step that I can recommend. And how am I staying fully present? In addition to what Ari said, I like to call it removing the noise. And removing the noise is rewiring our mindset. I am a mindset reprogramming coach primarily, and this is what I do. I help people to remove all of these negative thoughts that impede our ability to be fully present. For example, if you are concerned, how do I look? How does the person view me? How is my articulation? Am I making sense? If you're constantly searching for validation, this means you're not focused on the conversation. You are being focused on how is the other person recognizing you. This is number one, to build authentic confidence in yourself and your value, knowing that what you have to say matters, that you are worthy of respect. This is very important. Now, the other thing that I do is super practical and ensuring to the best of my abilities that I am in a distraction free space. This is super important, especially if you are someone who is more empathetic by nature. In other words, you are way more able to pick the energy. If you are having a very important conversation and you're being distracted by what is going on around you, this is going to take away from your presence.
I was thinking, Anne-Marie, when you just said that, then I've got notepad here because, as you know, I have short-term memory loss, so I like things down. But and, as an example, just then when you were talking, I want to give a real live example. I was like, oh, have I got lippy on my, like I could feel my tongue touching my teeth. And I was like, have I got red lipstick on my teeth as we're talking? That's a really good example of where you're talking. I'm trying to be present. A thought has taken me out of the moment into something else. And I had to my head say, hang on a second, can I hear what Emma is saying? Do I understand? And so one of the things that I try and do is repeat back, usually repeat back what I heard, or ask myself the question, what am I hearing here? So that can bring me right back. If you imagine you're on a street and it's like you've gone off the road into the bushes and you need to hop back on the highway. So there's some really cool little tips and hacks that you can do there. And that might just be something physical, like touching your legs or your hands, just to remind yourself. It might be focusing on your breath. I tend to focus on the words that the other people are saying and what am I seeing and sensing here. So not just what I hear, but what are they doing physically? Like, are their shoulders deep? Are they leaning forwards? Are they sitting back? What's happening with their posture? But also, can I sense anything? Is there any unspoken words? Is there any hostility? Is there any frustration? Is there some excitement in the air? Like, what can I feel, even though that's not something tangible, in this conversation? And if I'm not sure, I'll ask the person. I'll be like, you sound really excited, or as you're talking, it sounds like that sounds really frustrating. And it's kind of like a question. It's like that sounds frustrating, as in, am I right? And then that gives you an opportunity to kind of be like, yes, no, you're almost there. I mean, do you do that as well?
I am nodding because what you're saying is again so practical, and I want to pause and unpack because I'm sure that our viewers or the people who are listening to the audio version are taking notes. And again, the first thing to do if you want to improve your
My computer's unplugged. Hang on a second.
again, this is real life, and this is exactly what happens.
We're good. Sorry, you were just going to unpack it, Maria.
Fantastic, and here we are. And speaking of which, here is another action step I can recommend. For example, if you find yourself easily faced when something goes not according to plan, again, the mindset reprogramming coach in me has a suggestion, and the suggestion is for you to trace your patterns of control. Are you a control freak? In other words, if something happens, are you losing your ability to stay emotionally balanced? Because in conversations, this is why, again, the idea of this type of podcast is authentic and raw on purpose, because I want to show you what happens when things get unscripted. When we edit footage, we can edit out all of these moments when there is disruption of the sound, or someone needs to plug in their computer. Now, the reason I'm keeping all of this in the footage is because this is what happens in real life. In real life, we don't say, hold on, let me say it again. Sometimes we might, but usually we move on and we go with the flow. So to sum up and to give you a few practical suggestions, the first thing is to check in with your nervous system. Very often I work with people who are dealing with occasional social anxiety, or let's say they don't feel very comfortable when they're put on the spot, or let's say they have the ability, the pattern of micromanaging, and they fear that when something doesn't go according to plan, it's a failure and everything else. So again, the action step here is for you to come back to the presence of being connected to the other person. Or if you are speaking in a room full of people, how can you hold the space? This energetic contagion, if you wish. And according to psychology, this is a scientific fact. The emotional contagion means that when together, whether it's you and another person, or it's you with hundreds of other people, when you maintain positive vibration, positive energy, the frequency of the conversation increases. This is why we see people who attend motivational speaking summits. The energy is so palpable because people are in this zone of excitement. So again, to step back and come back to the present moment, again, the action steps that I can recommend based on what Ali suggested is to check in with yourself, and when you hear a thought that is more self evaluating, do I have lipstick on my teeth, is my hat tilted, whatever it is, to address the thought and then come back to the present moment. Now, something that I recommend is to discern the how important it is for you to address what is going on versus not address what is going on. For example, if you have so much lipstick on your teeth that is obviously noticeable, you can make a joke. You can find a way to graciously fix it, right? However, very often I find that we are in our heads and we assume that the other person is seeing this flow that we think we have. However, the other person is not recognizing it at all. And what I recommend is to be spontaneous. If you cannot pretend that this is not there, the issue, include it in the conversation.
Like, for example, you could say, do I have lipstick on my teeth? Or you could say, you could make a joke of it. Like I could say, right now, anyone that's wearing lipstick, I bet you've just checked your teeth. So that's kind of like how you bring it into the conversation.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Another thing that you can do that I'm just thinking about, I feel like a real life accident that can happen a lot is, let's say you're drinking tea or coffee or your beverage of choice and you spill it on your shirt. Ouch. This could happen in real life for sure. So again, what you can do is to either, of course, try to fix your outfit if you can. However, if you cannot, let's say you just spilled something on your shirt before an important conversation. I hope it doesn't happen, but let's say it does. Again, you can use humor. Humor is such an icebreaker, and you can say something around the line of, you know what, I was so excited for this conversation that I started doing jumping jacks and I spilled coffee on my shirt. And people will start laughing because they know you are exaggerating. And the thing is that, again, when you connect to people's humanity, virtually everyone is going to resonate with you, because all of us have moments of embarrassment. All of us have moments of feeling like the other person is not engaged with us, or whatever it is. So the more you connect to people's humanity, the more you're going to naturally break the ice and build rapport with everybody.
And I was thinking too, the other part is when we're in conversation with someone, I like to call it dancing in conversation, because it really is like a dance. But when we're dancing in conversation with someone, you might often catch yourself, I definitely do, thinking about what I'm going to say next. Yeah. So as you're talking, I start to think, oh, I'm going to say next about the yellow sticker on the wall. And I've stopped listening to what you're saying. So it might be worth us just pausing there and having a conversation about what we do in that space. One of the things that I do is I trust the process. Like if something is important enough, it will come back into my thinking. Yeah. So if I've got, oh, there's a really good thing I could say there, and you're still talking and you're still talking and you're still talking, I don't have to focus on that thing. I can let it come and I can let it go because I know it will circle back. And then it's about hopping back on that lane. It's about, am I listening to what Anne-Marie is saying? Am I truly present, or am I off just thinking about what I want to say next? So there's two things I did there. One is, am I listening? Come back in and focus on what you're saying, but also letting go of my thoughts and not hanging on to them super tight in case we forget them.
Oh, this is such a great analogy. Absolutely. And again, one of the many reasons I value you so much is because you're so authentic. And I find this to be so attractive in every conversation. When you can feel that the other person is coming from an authentic place and embodied confidence, you naturally trust them more. And I find that very often, let's say we want to present ourselves in a certain way, and we put on a facade, and we say, I'm a coach, I'm a therapist, so this means I have all of the answers. This is definitely not true. And in fact, if you remember what Ali said in the beginning, I get it wrong more often than I get it right. And of course, this is not true because I know her. She gets it right way more than she gets it wrong. However, again, is that humility that is extremely important in every conversation, to always find ways to improve yourself from curiosity and not judgment. From curiosity and not judgment. Let me repeat that. After each conversation, especially you are at the phase when you are building your public speaking skills, practice curiosity and not judgment. Every single time when you speak, you create opportunities to improve yourself. And if you have a very unrealistic expectation that every word that comes out of your mouth is going to be pure gold, you're going to be disappointed. Now, on the other hand, if you're constantly criticizing yourself, thinking that nothing that you say matters, you are in the other extreme of unnecessary self denial of your opportunity to speak from the heart, which is very important. And to
So,
start, yes.
oh, you go. Oh, I was
No,
just
no.
going to ask there, Anne-Marie, I'm curious for you then, how do you balance when you say about the critique part, because I know we both have that part and I'm sure everyone listening does as well. There's
Cheers.
an element times 100. There's an element of my critique part that allows me to grow and to reflect and to, improve. And then there's an element that it's really unresourceful for me. So I was just wondering then, as you were talking, when you're saying to be heart-led and to be really authentic in the conversation and to not judge yourself and to be curious, sometimes this is easier said than done. And sometimes it can be helpful to actually put a lens over what happened and say, could I have said that better? Perhaps maybe I didn't put my best foot forwards. Maybe perhaps my intention wasn't as authentic or as real or as helpful as I wanted it to be. Because I know, well, I certainly have bad behavior sometimes. So, there is the other side of the coin when we do actually do something that it may be incorrect, may not be great, may not be the way we want to show up for ourselves or people around us.
Mhm.
There's 100 questions in there. Take your pick as to anyone you want to ask.
Yeah, speaking of open questions, I'm going to pause here for a moment because what you said is it's a topic on its own. And how do you balance the ability to be self-analytical? I'm avoiding the word critical. The ability to be self-analytical versus self-critical in from unresourceful place, as Ali said. And I would say that again, it's very important for us to acknowledge, and I'm all about transparency, that what we are promoting that authentic confidence doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen by us giving you a few action steps that you start implementing. I've been improving my confidence for since my teenage years, and it's a daily process. So I would like everybody to relax into whatever you are with your self concept, self image, and to remember that authentic confidence is not about faking it. And I know many coaches talk about faking confidence with confident body language, confident
Fake it
tonality.
till you
Yes,
make it.
yes, and I don't think that's very resourceful. It could be helpful, of course. However, when we're talking about embodied transformation, I don't think this is the best strategy because you might fake it, you might fake, and people might perceive you as confident in your communication. However, this is not going to give you that authentic presence. And let me give you an example. As Ali was talking about the ability to be fully present on what the other person is saying instead of injecting what you want to say next. This is a very good example of how, when we are not fully authentic in our self expression, we can allow these thoughts to interfere. And if you really unpack, again, the mindset coach here, if you really unpack from where is this need to inject your own thoughts before the other person has finished their thought, and I've done this so many times, especially in my past, when I didn't have authentic confidence, i I was striving to be perceived as intelligent and smart, and I needed to make sure that what I say next is smart. Now, of course, it wasn't intentional, it wasn't conscious. That's why we talk about subconscious work. It was subconscious, it was me craving that validation. And now, when I'm fully present, I can fully meet where the other person is and even remember what they have said from the very beginning of our conversation, because I'm not wasting time on what is my mind trying to produce. And speaking of which, again, I want to repeat what Ali said, because this is another very important point, and I just want to make sure it's highlighted. If something is meant to be a part of your conversation, it's going to come back. You don't have to say it at all costs, even if the context is no longer there. If what you wanted to say it was meant to be a part of the conversation, it is going to appear again.
There's a huge amount of trust you have to place in that, though. I'm constantly reminding myself to trust that process. That's probably a big one that catches me unaware often in conversations is, oh, am I going to remember? Oh, am I going to remember? So I have to be like, no, just trust it. Trust that it will come back. May not come back in this conversation, but it might come back in the next conversation.
Mm. This is so powerful, and it's so interesting that I had the same exact experience because, again, for those of you who are seeing us together for the first time, Ali and I, we have done different interviews together, and we love talking to each other so much that very often we do it just for fun. And last week we again, real life, we had to film the conversation last week, and there was some technology mishap, and we were chatting about some of the concepts we wanted to discuss today. And there are things that I remember saying as examples that were really good according to me, and now I'm intentionally keeping myself from repeating them, because if I am, this means that I want to sound smart versus being fully present. And what I said in the conversation last week is no longer relevant because this is a different conversation.
Yes. And I was thinking, Anne-Marie, when you started this conversation earlier on, we were talking about how to be present, right? How do we be in the moment and dancing with the other person? And one of the other ways to do that, I think you mentioned around, what if the other person isn't present? So it might be worthwhile us just having a chat around how we bring them into the conversation. So, we can only control our own behaviors, not other people's, but I do have some tricks and hacks to bring in the other person I call into the room or into the conversation, if, for example, I'm chatting to one of my staff members and I notice that their eyes are wandering off. A big one is like having a look at the time. Um, if you're someone that always has to watch the time, just set an alarm. I set the alarm all the time when I'm talking to someone so that I can be present in the conversation, when the alarm is going to go off when I need to go to my next thing. So someone might be checking the watch because they haven't got that tool. But, if they're checking that, if they're wriggling a lot all the time, it's like, what can we do to kind of bring them into the moment? And, one of the questions you could ask is something like, what's just happened now? Like, or what's going on for you as I say this? Or what haven't I asked you yet? Notice how all of those questions bring the person into this moment right here, right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I am now absorbing what you're saying because this is such a important topic, and I think that it's so specific for the type of person we are interacting with. Something that I have found to be helpful, again, drawing from the theory of the emotional contagion, and how if your energy is very palpable, it can influence the energy of the room. And what I have found out to be very effective in many situations, sometimes when people are more reserved, or if they appear more standoffish, or they appear even frustrated, sometimes it's not because they're negative towards you or what you're saying. Sometimes it's because they're dealing with something. Let's say they have some social anxiety, or they have their own inner critic speaking through them in this very moment. Let's say you are very positive and the other person looks like they're not in alignment with what you're saying. Perhaps right at this very moment they're having a negative thought, right? And this is why empathy is so important, and especially because both Ali and I, as you heard previously, we have dealt with inner self-criticism for a long time, which is very common for us high achievers. And by the way, if you see yourself in this description, tell us in the chat. And ultimately, if you have ever dealt with self-criticism, you know that it's so easy for you to slip away from the conversation and start wondering if you're good enough, right? For so many different reasons. So what I do when I feel that the other person is pulling away energetically, again, you have to diagnosticize the situation, because it's very context specific. If someone is in a very negative space, if you are too positive, this actually is going to create dissonance.
Yeah.
So what I do, I meet them where they are, and then I gradually start to bring more energy and positivity. And then what happens at the end of our conversation, they have already increased their frequency, and we are more aligned.
And what you're describing there is the structure that sits behind conversations. I would say that I'm a natural conversationalist. Now, when I say natural, I don't mean I'm great at it. I just mean I sit comfortably in that space, right? I love conversations. I feel very confident walking into just about any conversation, because I come in with what you mentioned earlier around no expectation that I need to have all the information or need to get it right. Even a difficult conversation with a loved one, like a grandparent or a cousin that you might be having difficulties with, or a staff member or your partner, whoever, when I go into those difficult conversations, I don't come in with the expectation I'm going to get it right. I come in with like, let's just open this conversation up and see where it goes. Be fully present, and be, one of the other things I thought of it when you're saying then is, if I find that I'm jumping out in my mind, I'm jumping, like I imagine like we're here and I'm hopping over here with my thoughts, another way to come back into the conversation is to ask the curiosity question of the other person. Like, can I explore this a bit further? So can you tell me more about that? What do you mean by that? When you say X, does that mean this? Like really opening it up, like you're opening up a present and opening up a present, pass the parcel. So you keep opening it up and opening it up with being curious about what the other person is saying, until you're back on the thread again. You're like, oh, right, I'm back with them. I'm understanding where they're going. I'm following what they're saying. Sometimes it is okay to catch yourself out and be like, oh, how do I get back in this conversation and get present again? Because they've been talking for a few seconds or a minute and I've been zoned out. So a way to do that is to get curious again and to ask more questions. It's okay to go back over what they just spoke about and to be like, can you explain that to me again? Or tell me more about that, so that then you can kind of catch yourself up to the conversation and be fully there with them again.
Hmm. Absolutely. And again, this is such a practical suggestion that I would like to repeat because this is something that you can start doing right away to improve your ability to ask open questions. And again, open questions are questions that uh, evolve the conversation, right?
Mm.
Whereas dead end questions are questions that um, they create short answers, and these answers don't really unpack. And as Ali suggested, you can always ask, what did you mean by that?
Mm.
Something else that I recommend that is super important, especially in written conversation, more than verbal conversation. Very often in text, we remove context. So, for example,
Tone and
an,
nonverbal cues and all of the
yes,
things in interaction. 90% of
yes.
it.
Yes, yes. This is why today's conversation is has many perils because our human interaction is designed to have emotion. However, many of us use written communication. So here is a pro tip. And again, I'm using an example for today. I was speaking to a client, and they responded back. They said, "I'm often okay." So let me backtrack to give you context. I gave them uh, a reframe, and I gave them different perspectives to think about. And then they responded back by stating, I am often thinking about that, right? And now a common mistake that I find is to assume that when they say I'm often thinking about that they're referring to what you have just said. It makes sense, but it's not always the case. Very often people in may get influenced by what you're saying, and their train of thought might have gone in a very different direction. You never know. So it's always important to say, what do you mean by that? Or
Or
if
do
you,
you mean like, or you
yes.
could say, do you mean what I just said? Or write it out really clearly. Like there, I, there may be situations where this isn't relevant, but most of the time I never ever feel afraid or like I'm a parrot when I say to someone, are you saying blah, blah, blah? Like, are you telling me that you're hoping to go to the gym next Friday? Or I think what you're saying is you want to go to the gym next Friday. You know, repeating back allows the other person to listen and say, did they hear what I'm saying? Did they get the right tone? Did they get the right energy? Did they get the right words? And they will be the first person to say to you if you got it wrong. And them correcting doesn't necessarily mean that you've done something wrong, right? Again, it's the judgment piece we put on ourselves. This is the dance. Table tennis, you know, just because you hit it to the left side of the table as opposed to the right isn't right or wrong. It just means the other person needs to move that way.
Mhm. Yes, and I really like that analogy because conversation is like a dance, and for the
Mhm.
conversation to move freely and to flow freely, the two sides of the dialogue of the tango, if you wish, have to move together. And speaking of tango, this is a very good analogy for the conversation. Sometimes you step
Yeah.
back to reassess, you step back to make sure you are fully internalizing what the other person is saying. And something you can do always, I do it all the time. I literally say, I want to make sure I understand, and then I repeat, because
Yeah.
sometimes what we say and what we mean is not the same thing. So when you say let me make sure I understand, and then you repeat, not only are you showing that you have heard, you are giving the other person room to reflect, to make sure that they what they said is what they are thinking, and to confirm or reiterate. So this is very important to always make sure that you got it right, and what the other person is saying is what they're also meaning.
I do. I use that all the time, Maria. I say, I just want to check with you that I've heard this correctly. And then I go in and I work on the crisis line. So I do 4 hours a fortnight on our helplines in Australia, where people can call up. Often it's they're feeling lonely. They might have some emotions that they're finding hard to kind of navigate their way through. They might be suicidal. But usually a couple of minutes into the conversation, I say exactly what you just said. I said, I'm just going to check in with you and say back what I'm hearing, just so I can check that I've heard it correctly or that we're on the same page. Now, most of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, there is such a positive response back. They're like, yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to say. Or, oh, you get me. But the 10 or 20% of the time, it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is X. And that's when we've got to let our, like, I heard it wrong. I said it wrong. It's not about us.
Yeah.
We're just clarifying. But
That
Emma,
is so true.
I was thinking then something we haven't spoken about, which is really relevant to when you said, when you said you step back from the conversation and you take a bit of a landscape view, am I hearing, where am I at? And then you go in for a summary. I'd love to know when you use silence and how you use silence, because that can be a really helpful strategy, tool, part of the conversation. It can be natural. You can use it intentionally, and sometimes it can be really unhelpful as well.
Oh, this is a very good question. Thank you for asking that. And again, I want to go back a little bit and share that as many of my clients, in my childhood, I had trauma that I had to go through, and very common, and I'm sure you can attest to that. A very common trauma response is when you freak out when there is silence, because your subconscious mind is associated with something is about to happen, not in a good way, right?
I need to be on alert. I need to be on alert
Yes.
here. I don't know what's going on, but I need to be ready.
Absolutely. And this is a conversation for another time, because I was just thinking that if you had a parent figure or a primary caregiver who was volatile, or let's say they were raising their voice, there was a lot of conflict at home, you might actually erupt very easily. You might raise your voice when it's not necessarily. So again, there are so many nuances here. However, very often when I work with people who are dealing with conflict phobia, in other words, every time when the other person is not responding, they assume that they have something against them, and they become hyper vigilant. Again, another topic for another time. So to come back to the present moment and use this example to give you action steps, ultimately silence could be such a powerful way to display your ability to hold space without interjecting your personal need for validation. Because let's face it, if the other person is being silent and you're not giving them the space to be silent, it's because you want confirmation that they're not upset with you, or what you're saying is making sense with them, right? So in other words, you're seeking that validation that the other person is in alignment with you. And especially in coaching, I have found that one of the most impactful sessions I have had with clients is when they're going through something, and after, of course, we work on it and we process it, and I do mindset reprogramming, and then we sit in silence together, and I just hold space for them. And I hold space for them. I still mirror and match their breathing, even. I make sure that I am energetically balanced, and I hold space. I have had situations of, I just remembered something very, very interesting. I had one time when a client, who is a male client, started crying, and he told me that his entire adult life, he was in his 50s at the time, his entire adult life, he was terrified of showing his emotions. And you can imagine the positive effect of finally allowing himself to be so vulnerable.
In a safe space, and I think that's what you're saying when you're talking about that kind of holding space and being silent for someone, where you're just there with the intention to be there. Like, I guess maybe people don't know what we mean when we say holding space. I'm just wondering, just mentioning, because that's language we would use every day, right? It's like I'm holding space, or I might think in my head, just hold space here. They just need you to hold. Like, what comes to mind when we say that word?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that, because I admit that very often I use coaching terms in my conversation, because this is how my brain works. Um, how would I how would I explain what does holding space mean? I would say that the most practical way of holding space for someone is again just what I mentioned previously, focusing on them, focusing on their energy, focusing on what they're saying, focus on from where are they coming from, and making sure that you are moving from your own map to their map, which is another coaching term, I know. However, to simplify, this simply means that you remove yourself as a factor of this conversation because it's not about you. And there is so much research that shows that when people are feeling hurt and respected, as Ali said, when she is talking to people and I would say saving their lives even, that's all they need in this moment, to know that there is someone out there who cares for them, who believes in them, who, yes.
No, I was just thinking, sorry. And anyone that's watching, see how I took that big breath? See how Anna Marie was like, yes, that's like that's holding space and like I was like, I was thinking about something quite big there, and then you picked up, and then I feel guilty because I'm like, you haven't finished your conversation. You go, this is the dance. This is the I could have then said to you, no, Anne Marie, you keep going, or I take the reins now and I speak up. It's those moments, and I just wanted to capture that one right there because that was a moment that could have gone either way.
Yeah.
But one of us probably needed to respond to that big because if you just kept talking without responding, I could have felt invalidated. I could have gone into judgment. You could have gone into judgment, So it's those little micro moments that there was not a word said, there was an action or a sound that we can also pick up on. Totally off track. But I was thinking holding space for me, as you were talking, I'm thinking holding space for me is an invisible cuddle. Like I think of it like a big balloon, a big balloon that I wrap around the person I'm talking to. And it's like, I'm here. I have you. I may not know how. I may not know for how long, but it's this, my arms are open, my heart is open, my soul is open to you, for you, with the intention to be here with you in whatever shape and form that is. In my head, that's kind of how I think about holding space for someone. And that may be through silence, or that may be through curiosity, or that may be through a cuddle. There's no rule book on how to hold space. But I think that's then where it comes in, Anne Maria, what you were saying around the intention behind what we do.
The intention behind what we do, yes, absolutely. And also going back to what happened with you having that moment, this is another very important example how it is important to acknowledge this nonverbal cues, because if someone had this it could mean anything. They might have had an aha moment. Maybe you said something and their subconscious mind was like, wow, this makes so much sense. Or perhaps it reminded them of something else. Or perhaps their subconscious mind jumped to remember a negative connotation of what you're saying, right? So it's so important to again be able to not only acknowledge, integrate everything that happens. And again, to sum up this conversation with one very tangible takeaway that I hope all of you take from this. And this one,
I'm waiting to hear what it is. Did you one thing? What is it?
There is so many. However, I really believe the power of one, which means trying to come up with one or three action steps so that you remember this conversation for the rest of your lives and take action, which is very important. Um, ultimately, even though there are so many takeaways, and I would love for you to let us know in the chat, in the comment section. Ali and I are both very eager to learn from you and hear from you. I would say for me personally, if there is one takeaway that is very tangible and very applicable to all conversations, from one-on-one conversation to boardroom leadership conversations, it is the ability to remember, and I'm quoting Kali, and I really love how you said it. Remember that if you don't say something, even if you wanted to say it right at this very moment, if it was meant to be, it's going to come again in the conversation. This is how you become present. This is how you hold space for the other person. This is how you integrate everything that happens, verbally and non-verbally. And finally, as another aspect of this takeaway, remembering that how you individually, how you show up is going to have such an important impact on how the other person shows up. And you have so much responsibility when you show up with positivity, when you show up with curiosity, when you show up with the ability to be fully present. Set an alarm, as Ali suggested, so you're not distracted. Whatever you need to do, make sure you're not hungry, make sure you're not thirsty, make sure you don't have to use the bathroom, whatever it is. Do your best to hold the most available emotional and mental space in yourself for this conversation, and to be very curious about the other person.
And I think too, something we haven't addressed, and I don't want to open up a whole new chapter of conversation here, but I think it needs to be honored, is that when I said I get it wrong more than I get it right, I also sometimes choose not to hold space for others because I need others to hold space for me. So for example, at the moment my daughter's very sick, and when we first got on, I needed Anne-Maria, you to hold space for me. I was a bit, not very professional and a bit undone and a bit like, well, deer in headlights. And that's a moment we do have that choice too, where it's like we're with someone that can hold space for us in that moment. It is okay for us to unravel. It is okay for us not to be in this like, I'm here for you, I'm listening. It's okay just to be like, I'm taking a moment for you to hold me while I'm in this emotional state.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing this up, because this is also how we create interdependent relationships when it's not one side. It is very mutual. And again, something you can do is to ask, can you hold space for me? Or let's say you can say, I'm going through something very important. When is a good time for us to talk? And this is how you give the other person that opportunity to be present for you, right? This is
And I
very
think I
important.
said to you this morning, I just need 5. Like, can I just have 5 minutes? I've just jumped on and, I've been on the phone to doctors. And I think that was my language. It was like just a bit of a time frame around it. So I set the expectation with you, like, I just need 5 minutes and I'm a bit frazzled and, like I'm here. I'm just here for the convo, but like I just need to like, whew, get anchored, get focused, be really present. And as we said, I would say in this conversation, I don't know how long we've been chatting for, half an hour, I'm not sure, but my mind would have gone, I want to be really honest with everyone that's maybe 20 times to what I'm dealing with at the moment in my life. That's quite serious. And I was able to jump back into the conversation. So it's not that it doesn't happen. It's not that I'm saying to you that you're going to get to a place that you can just be wholly present in every conversation and not be thinking about the future and the past. I guarantee you will think about the future. You will think about the past. You will think about what's happening with yourself. You'll think about, where's my shirt, or what's happening, or am I standing the right way, or are they going? It's okay. It's how you bring yourself back into the conversation. Once you recognize it, what can you then do to jump back in and be fully present? I think that's what we were saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, I feel like this conversation is even not just about how to ask open questions, but it's how to hold space, how to be
Yeah.
fully present.
I
And
forgot
again,
we're talking about open questions. Have we talked about those? Not sure that we did that.
I feel like this entire conversation was an entire open question, so I think we are on track. And ultimately, that's to put a ribbon on everything. That's exactly what you can create with one open question. So the very first question that started this entire conversation led to so much more. And this is exactly what I was striving to show you with today's episode, and I hope we did a good job with that. I wanted to show you that it takes one open question to open a myriad of possibilities. We talked about addressing silence. We talked about how to be fully present. We talked about how to deal with inevitable distractions. We talked about what to do if you accidentally spill coffee on your shirt, or you have lipstick on your teeth, or whatever happens.
Your computer charge is not working.
Right? We talked about how to ask for the other person to hold space for you. We talked about what to do if the other person is not in a positive, energetic space. We talked about the emotional contagion. We talked about so much. And,
Did we
and
talk
this is,
about all that? Are you sure? You have to go check.
I believe so. And again, this is what this is the power of asking open questions. And let me tell you, Ali and I, we love our conversations together, and you can share more if you want. And every single time, this is exactly what we do. We start with one question, and then we talk about everything, and it's always so enriching for me. And this is exactly why we talked about the importance of being curious and always learning from each interaction.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things we didn't mention is that there's different relationships for different times and for different reasons in life. So Anne-Marie, you and I have a very, like you said, curious relationship. So we're very comfortable with saying to each other, like, well, how do you do it? Or, like when I asked you, how do you hold space? What does that word even mean for you? And you paused because you were like, oh, have I ever thought about that? Do I know? Like, and then as you were talking, I had the opportunity to think about what it meant for me. And then we could have spoken about that for an hour, right? Like we could have just been like, but what about in this scenario? And what about in this scenario? Like that's our relationship, is we have a very curious, like, what's inside your head? What have you seen? What have you learned? What do you know? And then integrating it into our worlds. But for someone else, like another relationship, it might be all fun, and that's okay too. So, again, you've used the word non-judgment a lot here. And I guess just to everyone that's listening, give yourself permission to just be okay and be as is. And, life is a real journey. Like it's a real roller coaster ride in relationships, in communication. You're guaranteed to get it wrong. That's the one thing I can tell you. That's the one thing I do know. Uncertainty is the only certainty we have. So it's like, just give yourself permission to get it wrong. And when you do, just own that space. Just say, look, I know I didn't say this, or I sort of felt like I was a bit judgy there, or I don't know what to say here, or, like it's okay just to own it.
And speaking,
Yeah, we must be due, are we? Is it nearly time?
yes, speaking of owning it, this is another aspect of our communication with Ali. Time goes by so quickly, and again, just to repeat what she said, owe yourself, owe your moments of judgment, owe your moments of curiosity. And again, the more you strive to transform every criticism into feedback and opportunities for growth, you're going to always evolve your communication, and most importantly, you're going to learn so much about yourself and the world. This is Ana Maria from Luna Coaching. We're going to finish with a summary of our personal takeaways. I already shared my personal most important takeaway, and I would love to hear from you, Ali. What are your top 3 takeaways from this entire conversation?
So one of the problems with being fully present when you have short-term memory loss, because I've had a stroke, is that I go with the conversation, and to hop back and think about what we spoke about is actually quite challenging and quite, I guess, structural for me. Like I have to actually really think about it. So just give me a moment. I would say lots of things really, but the one that really stands there in the forefront of my mind is how often I never go back to the simplicity of communication. Like what we're talking about here, very rarely do I have a conversation with someone about how to hold space, our physical, like how we physically come into the room, what's our body language doing, the way that we use open questions. I'm not in that space all that often, and it's a really nice reminder. It's also really hard to put structure behind something you do every day. It's like when a toddler first learns to walk, they're like, I put this foot in front of that foot. I hold on to this bar. Like everything is thought through and systemized. And then they learn to walk, and then they learn to run. And as a teenager, we don't think about how we put one foot in front of the other, right? So communication is similar. As we level up in our communication skills, we might dip back down, but we often forget where we started, and we forget those kind of foundational blocks and those building blocks that serve us things that we lean on every day to have these conversations. So that's probably what I'm taking away the most, is how nice it is to revisit that space and to truly think about what do we do in conversation? You know, how, if we're going to help other people understand some of the more advanced skills, how do we say that? You know, like, what are they? And what do you actually do? So that's definitely something. I think it's okay to have your reactions. It's okay for them to have their reactions and to call it, and just the whole idea of how to be present in the moment. You know, it's in this busy landscape that we live in today, it's even harder, and it's getting harder to be present in the moment. So being present in conversations, or taking 5 minutes of your day to be present just with yourself in your own communication, your own internal communication, I think they're the things that probably have come up for me towards the end of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Ali, for your time, and for everybody who watched or listened to this podcast. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to subscribe for more episodes, and I wish you a pleasant remaining of your day or evening. Bye.